And of course, it's a privilege to be around here and share some insight as to what we do with maths in GlaxoSmithKline. So every now and then, obviously, we all come across challenging questions. So that was one of the most recent ones I had. So how on earth do we get new medicines? And it's easier said than done, because, well, the low-hanging fruit had been picked a long time ago. At the same time, expectations are getting better and better. We all get not just cured, but be cured very comfortably with no ill side effects or anything. And it's also the case, as one Sanofi executive put it, of being better than the Beatles, because you're expected to be better than yourself and every competitor all the time, every time. And I'm sure I still should remember it. It's obviously the same in academia as well, where you're constantly in competition. But it's pretty much the same rules of the game also in pharma. So, going more towards biologics, because that's the realm I inhabit. Obviously, we started with small molecule drugs more than 150 years ago. The first molecules were extracted from natural sources, then they were slightly modified, like aspirin is acetylated salicylic acid. We came to biologic drugs. We had insulin, just extracted. Now we do it all recombinantly. But obviously the crown of the jewel, mostly for the time being, is recombinant antibody technology. And although antibodies are made, provide us with everyday protection against all sorts of ills, the ones which are in clinic are not identical to ones in nature. Actually, they are all man-made in test tube. There are few exemptions. The first therapeutic antibodies were actually made in horse about 100 years ago. Anyway, being better than the Beatles means that, well, we can't be quite happy with what there is out. We need to push the boundaries. And we push the boundaries by engineering the binding sites of the antibody, so that the single antibody, which otherwise would have two binding sites which are identical, we engineer them to be different. And in this case, it was a bit like putting the cart in front of the horse, in a sense that the problem was solved first before we had really the job to do with it. But obviously that didn't stop anybody from going really wild about engineering all sorts of different antibodies that can be made. The question is which one of them is best and for what kind of purpose, even assuming that all of them can be expressed and purified and made into anything that can be drug-like. So, but the first question first, why on earth would actually one need to go to all the trouble of making a bispecific antibody if maybe just mixing two normal ones will be good enough? And more often than you might imagine, actually people don't have a rational answer to that. We do it because we can, even if it costs time, money, and so on and so forth. So with this in mind, we set out building some kind of mechanistic mathematical model as to what's happening, because clearly combining two different modalities, functionalities, doing that at the same time has benefit. There is different indications there, and we're focusing in the first instance just on the structure of the molecule. We're not really talking here about which two different targets to choose. But if we're talking about antibodies, then quite a few of them, probably about, these days might be already close to 100, are already in the clinical trials. Nearly about a fifth of them have targets which are both in solution. About a quarter have both on the same cell. So some have one in solution, other on the cell, and most are actually kind of bispecifics which aim to bridge two different cells. And jumping ahead a little bit, this talk will be mostly about this situation here, but we also shine some light to this quarter and actually can draw some conclusions about what happens in the most challenging of them all. So we have data, we have mathematical mechanistic models, we put in independently measured parameters, and then we make a predictions, compare them with the experimental observations, as usual. So some things are really easy. Antibody binding sites are independent, so if we have bispecific antibody, the blue arm binds blue, the yellow binds yellow. It really doesn't matter if it's two molecules that's bispecific or one of that blue and another one yellow. It's all the same. There is really no point of engineering this kind of drug whatsoever. But people still do it every now and then, just in case. It's a bit more less straightforward if we have one of the targets on cell membrane surface. As far as the soluble target goes, it's still the same, doesn't matter. However, normal antibody, which both arms can interact with target on the same cell's surface, can experience something binding enhancement called avidity effect. Here actually one can argue that, well, combination dosing is more efficient than actually going to the trouble of doing the bispecific. But people still do it. And now the bulk of the talk. What happens if we have a bispecific antibody which binds two different targets expressed on the surface of the same cell surface? And here we have typical situation, let's say about 50,000 receptors on cell surface, average distance around 50-60 nanometers between them. And people have looked at different scenarios. Can we pretend that they're actually in solution? Can we pretend that, well, they're actually as they are in the picture, like in a cartoon? Or actually, do we have to actually take into account that this membrane is a bit like piece of liquid where proteins can move around in two-dimensional space, liquid crystal. So, fortunately enough, a few years ago, scientists at Medimune in the States did a wonderful series of experiments and published experimental data, but without giving much of a mechanistic or even and no quantitative insight what they observed. They compared an antibody binding to cells which either expressed both targets, protein called CD4 and protein called CD70, or just one of them for all practical purposes. And now bear in mind that distance between the binding sites here is about 9 nanometers, whereas on the cell surface is about 60 nanometers. And funnily enough, they found that whatever antibody, they called it DuoDMAP, is bind to that cell surface is always in complex with both arms at the same time. There was no antibody which was just hanging on by one arm alone. And it all happened at very, very low concentrations. Well, actually nothing should have been bound at all. Whereas when they had cells expressing either just one or the other target, everything was according to the textbook mass action kinetics equilibrium. So cross-linking there, it involves three molecules. Three molecules don't get into one place in space at the same time. There are about a dozen reactions, and they involve uranium hexafluoride, if I'm correct. Anything beyond that is more or less guaranteed to happen sequentially. So we have antibody in solution. It binds one target. It can bind another target. And then what happens is they become cross-linked on the cell surface. And they can become cross-linked because cell proteins are mobile in membrane. And actually the diffusion coefficient is fast enough so that the random walk that this protein does on cell surface is fast enough that within a minute or so it covers enough distance, it would circumnavigate the cell if it could. Well, some of them probably will, but there are tens of thousands of them. There is plenty of time and chance to meet others. So we decided to simulate this situation using scenario mechanism, using two different approaches, Monte Carlo Brownian simulation and ordinary differential equation based approach. The trick here is to bridge reactions occurring in solution with reactions occurring on surface, because the rate constants are different. The rate constants can't be compared. The rate constant which defines reaction in solution in 3D is not the same that happens in two-dimensional space, which people still sometimes do. So that's the numerical simulation. That's one particular reactions that I perform. So that's the surface of the cell, simulating here a tiny fraction of it, a cube, 0.1 times 0.1 micron, and then variable height. So there are about 30 receptors in small blue and small green on the bottom surface here, and the green red dots are antibody molecules in solution. As the antibody reacts with small green, it becomes a big green, or small blue, it becomes a large blue. So then that's the antibody target complex. And when the two complexes meet, they become the ternary one, they become yellow ones. Each time step here is about 1 to 100 microseconds. It's all, from first principles, as we can say. And yeah, the reactions, occasionally the simulated time courses up to an hour. So there were more than 1 million, if you like, steps simulated here. Right, so what was the result then? This is a typical result. We had 1 nanomolar antibody, and we can, in different runs, we can just plot out the time course for the 3 species of the target of the cell, on the cell from one target and the other target. And the same for the ternary complex here. Strangely enough, there was no observation, no predicted accumulation of just monovalently attached antibody on the surface. Everything was bivalently attached in a ternary complex. And even more so, the predictions from the model, which had, there was no curve fitting involved whatsoever, matched more or less quantitatively the experimental observations. Here, the authors of the paper mixed the cells with different antibody concentrations and measured the bound antibody after 1 hour of incubation, and they got this nice cold titration curves. So far, so good. That's what we can get experimentally and observe, also predict in silica. We can also, looking a bit further, we were also able to build ordinary differential equation models, because Monte Carlo simulation, each reaction took hours, if not more than an overnight run to simulate. This is not quite practical. So ordinary differential equations much faster, and here we can already simulate the same reaction over hundreds of thousands of reactions very, very rapidly. And we can actually capture, again, antibody binding to dual positive cells and to single positive cells. Right. And here we can predict what happens when the affinity is 1 nanomolar or 10 nanomolar or 60 or 100, binding just disappears. However, although it doesn't bind to cells expressing just one or the other target, even the weakest variants still bind to dual positive cells. So something more is happening. And that's where mathematical modeling can actually give us a little bit of insight, because what we realized is that at high concentrations, let's say about more than 1 nanomolar, the reaction reaches equilibrium very quickly, within 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It takes about an hour or so at 1 nanomolar. At very low concentrations, the reaction actually doesn't reach equilibrium at all. In fact, it would take about 100 to 1,000 hours to reach equilibrium, which is just impractical, will not never ever happen in test tube. But it allows us to estimate the boost to the binding from cross-linking event, and it turns out around somewhere between 1,000 to 10,000 fold, which is also estimated independently from experimental data, and that's what's called avidity effect. And the avidity effect comes mostly from much lower dissociation. What roughly happens is even when we have ternary complex on the cell surface, even if one arm comes loose, before the free receptor can diffuse away, the form reforms again. So we have very, very stable complexes on the surface and hence much tighter binding. As a result, one can actually then design drugs which specifically bind to cells in complex mixtures which express at the same time two different targets, not those express just one or the other. And that's quite important when it comes to antibody drug conjugates for cancer, for example, where nobody wants to get the toxin to the wrong cells. We can use the model to look a bit further. For example, we can have people have engineered antibodies which are bispecific, but this is a normal antibody, but due to antibody symmetry, which is just one axis of symmetry here, when it binds the cell surface target, the binding sites are orientated in opposite ways, whereas on a membrane target, they would be on the same way, oriented in the same way. Hence, there would be some distortion involved and energy expended there. Likewise, it gives you an idea why something called biparatopic antibodies can still make sense, where two different arms bind different binding sites on the target. And if we have dimeric receptors, it's very unlikely that a single antibody can engage both sites on the same target. At the same time, it's more likely that it forms chain-like structures on the cell surface, which have been observed experimentally, I think. And obviously, if it's a special case, if we have two or more antibodies like that present, then we have polyclonal response and we have something called capping. So it all adds up. And finally, when it comes to bispecifics in cell-cell interactions, well, we describe how antibodies, how reactions take place on the surface on the same cell. It also applies if we have just two interacting receptors on the surface of the cell. For all practical purposes, they don't necessarily be on the surface of the same cell. If the two surfaces are close enough from one cell and the other cell, it's still two-dimensional space here. We can still apply the same formalism here, and we can now have some insight what to expect when we have an antibody which temporarily creates a binding site for the other molecule here. And that's a bit of a clue which goes towards cell-cell interactions or I guess also, let's say, virus antibody interactions where we have many interactions taking place in the interface at the same time in the cell-cell synapse. Since we have ODE description, we can all put this into something called physiological-based pharmacokinetic model. We can simulate what happens if we put a drug into circulation and say that target is in bone marrow or in GI tract or heart or whatever. We have more or less figured out how to predict how quickly that drug gets into different organs. And it's a story of a subject of a different story, but we have also built tools to assemble ODE models, large models like that. This typically can easily contain more than 1,000 ODEs. These are impossible to generate by hand. So we have MATLAB code to build those automatically, literally in a matter of seconds to minutes. And I'm happy to also acknowledge that the work was done in GSK, but we also had very significant input from academics from a number of universities when we got together during one of the workshops at AstraZeneca a few years ago and derived it all over again, so it's really bulletproof, and we also published it. So it's all there, and model is there, all the software tools, scripts, everything is there. And yeah, I would like to acknowledge the colleagues here, the academics involved from half a dozen 5 different universities. 2 colleagues have moved on to AstraZeneca and UCB by now. The rest are still at GSK, and thank you for your attention.
Could you maybe again, because I missed it, explain why is it better to have 2 bindings a little stronger? Because it's what?
Yes, if the binding sites on the same antibody bind different targets, and if both targets are present on the surface of the same cell, the binding efficiency of the antibody is about, let's say, 10,000-fold stronger compared if it's binding.
You say efficiency? It's not the same
affinity.
as time?
It's
because in your model was clear, they need to bind first and then diffuse together.
Yes, but we're talking about here about the effective equilibrium coefficient.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they bind stronger and don't.
Yes. It don't come off, so its dissociation is much slower. Yeah.
So in a fluid flow system, for example,
Yeah.
when you're processing of antibodies, a lot of the time you get aggregations. Have you seen any difference in antibody samples where you had 2 different types of the segments as opposed to ones where they're both the same?
Well, that may well be upon the target. If a target has a single binding site, then one wouldn't expect any aggregates to form. However, if it's something like, let's say, viral particle, then antibodies, well, if a let's say particle has 2 binding sites, one can expect linear oligomers to form. If the target there was a trimer with 3 binding sites, then lattices will form. If it has 3, 4, 5 more binding sites, let's say viral particle, then cross-linking can lead to formation of aggregates, and those will be picked up very quickly in the liver then. Yeah.
Can you think about the linear oligomers forming on the cell surface?
Yes.
And can you, like, I guess I'm curious about is, like, can you visualize them? Do you end up with the long chains or many chains? Or how does that?
I think they have been observed experimentally on cell surface. Just single molecule fluorescence is sensitive enough already. Yeah, but yeah, for that, yeah, that would require either a biparatopic antibody or a dimeric cell surface receptor and a normal antibody. Yeah, and yeah. It doesn't, and the extreme case of that is, as I said, is a polyclonal antibody when we have many different epitopes on the same target, then everything just goes into one clump on the cell surface, which is called the, which is then easily seen as a just shiny spot on the cell. Yeah.
You mentioned that you do Monte Carlo simulations with this system, so I'm just wondering how far do you go in terms of representing the polymer? So how
in the case of Monte Carlo simulation, we only simulated binding to monomers, so we only followed it up to the formation of trimer. So one antibody arm binding one target, another binding another target on the cell surface. The cell surface targets didn't interact, didn't form dimers by themselves, so we didn't aim to simulate formation of dimers. Can be done.
And the forces or the energies between them, at what level did you describe them?
We had experimentally measured dissociation constants and dissociation association rate constants, which were measured in solution on Biacore surface plasmon resonance, and then the rest of it boiled down to measuring or rather modeling the association rate on the cell surface, which is a 2-dimensional process, and that was assumed to be diffusion limited on cell surface, just like reactions in volumins are diffusion limited in bulk. Thank you.